All right, so this Knife Thoughts video is going to be about this knife, and this is the Collector Knives exclusive LionSteel Slim Dom in diamond carbon fiber. So quite the name, but a knife that I was really excited for. I've been meaning to get more modern slip joints or modern traditional knives. That's not an oxymoron. So if you're interested in these modern slip joints, this might be a good video for you to watch. And first of all, I have had some of these LionSteel CollectorKnives exclusives before, specifically the Warhorse I had and really enjoyed, but I don't have that one anymore. I do have a video and article on it if you'd like to check that out. I'll have a link in the description. But first of all, these are made by LionSteel for Collector Knives. And Collector Knives is one of the longest running dealers of gradation cutlery knives, and that's how I became aware of them. And I've bought knives from Mike. It's Mike Latham is the owner for a long time, and he's been coming out with a lot of these. And the Dom, which is this model, the sheepfoot model, was the first of them. And he came out with several others, the Shuffler, which is a clip point, and the Roundhead, which is a spear point, and different versions with different handle materials and everything like that. But relatively recently, more recent than the rest of them basically, he came out with these slim versions. And so what these are is they are a single piece for the handle on each side, the handle scales, and no liners. So the normal versions have liners, and then they have a bolster of titanium usually, and then some kind of cover or scale material down here, more like a typical Barlow knife. And I wanted to get one of these slim versions because I think it kind of fits with this modern slip joint aesthetic a little bit better. I did like the looks of the other ones that I have had, but I think that this just looks really cool, and it makes it so that it's a little different, a little bit more differentiated from a traditional, Barlow sheepfoot. And I decided to go with the carbon fiber version because, interestingly, it's one of the less expensive of the slim versions, and I also thought it went along with this modern styling. So this is the diamond carbon fiber version, which means that instead of this being just flat like the bolster area, it is in a diamond pattern, and I wasn't sure if I would like that, but I really do. I think that it looks really great. I don't think that the camera is showing quite as much of that chatoyance or shine and variation that it really has in person. And I've really enjoyed the look of that since I got it. Speaking of that, I have carried this knife every day since I got it. I just haven't been able to get myself to carry something else. I've carried other things along with it, but I've had this in my pocket every day since I got it, over a week, and just have been really, really enjoying it. And it really hit me the right way. If you saw my unboxing video of it, opening it, it's just one of those things where sometimes you open a knife up and it just hits you the right way. And this did that. And I think that it is because it keeps a lot of what I like about a traditional slip joint, a traditional sheepfoot Barlow, with adding a lot of other cool things. So first of all, it has this really great, really classic sheepfoot style blade. You can see that the edge and the spine are pretty exactly parallel. And then it has a really nice cut swedge on both sides that goes into a curved angle towards the tip for just a really classic sheepfoot blade. It has a nice long pull here. Now, one thing I found on the Warhorse was that sometimes my finger would slip out of the long pull. I haven't had that happen at all on this knife. I don't know if they changed the angle or the depth of this long pull, but it is more secure for me than it was on the Warhorse. And it just looks great with that long pull. Even having the long pull on both sides, I actually think that's really nice. Typically, a traditional knife won't have the long pull on both sides. It'll be only on one side. And I actually think that it looks good having the long pull on both sides. Now, there is some branding, as you can see, but I don't think it's too much. It's not really a whole lot more than on a typical traditional knife. Often traditional knives have a big edge here in this area, which I'm not always a big fan of, and this is a little smaller than a typical edge would be on a traditional knife. Has the steel, which is M390 here on the tang. I will say that I think it would make it a little bit more like a traditional knife, and I think it would be cool, just, you know, the way I envision a traditional knife, if this, the LionSteel Italy CK edition, was on the back tang, or even on the front tang with the steel on the back tang. I think I would like that, and I think it would give it a little bit more of that traditional feel, but keep the modern aesthetic that I like and the modern features that I like. And that's really what it is. I like the aesthetic of the traditional knife with the features of the modern knife. Speaking of that, it does have modern construction. As you can see, it has screws. One thing I like about this slim version is that the screws are pretty faithfully in the same areas that screws are on pins are on a traditional knife. So you have one at the butt, one at the spring, and one up at the pivot. I do like the look of that, and the non-slim versions of these knives have a different screw setup. The screws are set up to hold the scales and the bolster in, and I didn't like that look of those screws quite as much. So I do like the positioning of these screws. Now, another thing that I think would make it look a little bit more traditional while keeping the design, modern design, is if instead of the flat parts of the screw being on the back or pile side of the knife, if those were over here. I don't know if you can flip them over. I don't know if I could do that. I haven't tried, I haven't taken it apart, and I don't plan to. But I think that it would give it a little bit better look if this flat part of the screw was on the side that you kind of look at when you're holding the knife, right? If you're right-handed, you have it in your hand like this, and it would give that just a little bit more of a traditional look. Even more so if this pivot screw were, instead of both being, I guess, what you might call a male pivot, where you screw them into kind of a tube in there, if one of them was a flat that you don't actually adjust and the other, you know, on the pile side or back side was adjustable. I think that would give it a really, really clean look. It would take away a little bit of the modernness to it that, again, I don't mind the modernness, but I think it would look a little bit better to my eye with these screws on this show side being flat. Now, speaking of the modernness, one thing that I really, really like is that these knives come with a stop pin. And so what that means is that you just don't have to worry about blade wrap. I can let that knife close basically as hard as I want to, and the edge is not going to hit the back spring. And the other great thing about that is, because of that, they can design this knife so that the tip sits well within the frame. And that's partly because of the sheep foot blade shape. Certainly sheep foot blades generally sit a little bit lower, but I think it's also because of that stop pin. And I really appreciate that. If you watch my channel, you know that I dislike proud tips with a passion, but I also dislike blade wrap. So it's nice to have really a deep setting tip without having to worry about the blade wrap. Now, one thing that I don't know if I noticed in my unboxing is that this knife actually does have some relatively significant gaps. It's always tough to see if there's not a light source behind the knife, but there are definitely some noticeable gaps between the back spring and the handles. And I don't know if that's because it's a carbon fiber handle and you know, it wouldn't have that on the titanium version or even the micarta versions, but on this version it does have some gaps there. The other thing is that this back spring sits pretty low. I mean, it's something where I don't care a whole lot about those things on this knife, either of those things on this knife, because it is a user. But if you do come from traditional knives and even modern knives, most modern knives, where the back spring is usually pretty flush with the handles, especially on, you know, more high-end knives like GECs, then you might be a little bit surprised by this. Pretty much in every position, the back spring is low towards the pivot, but it's not down towards the butt of the knife. So just something to be aware of. I don't know if that's something specific to my particular knife, or if it's something that you can expect to get on, you know, any of these knives. But I wanted to make sure to mention that the spring does sit a little low at all positions and there are some gaps. But it hasn't really bothered me in use. And speaking of use, I've really enjoyed it. I have cut a good bit of cardboard with this knife. I've done some food prep, some general usage, and it seems to be ground relatively thin there. Let's see if you can see that at all. And it seems to have held an edge well. I did touch up the edge after cutting some cardboard, and it came back to a really nice sharp edge pretty easily. I was using a two-sided stone from Wesson and my strop from the Stropping Young Lad. So I do have videos on those, so if you're interested in that, you can check those out. But it seemed to hold an edge well. It cut really well, and I do like the sheepfoot blade for, you know, its cutting, for how it cuts. You can do really good pull cuts, but you can also use it for more detailed cuts and things like that. Now, the action on this knife is really satisfying. It has great sounding snap, really nice snap, open and closed. The pull is what I would call a 5 or 6, not super strong, not weak, but also nice and snappy. So really just where I like it. And as for carrying it, it's been just really easy to carry. I mean, this knife is super lightweight, really lightweight. And you can put it in your pocket and just not worry about it. The carbon fiber scales really make this knife super light. Now, speaking of the scales, one thing that I wanted to mention, I didn't really notice it in the unboxing video, but I went back and looked, and it was there in the unboxing. So it did come with this. It's not something that, you know, I accidentally chipped it away or something, but the carbon fiber does have some slight issues. Right here, you can see there's a couple little pieces chipped out, and then up here. So some slight issues there, but nothing major. And really just overall, I've just really enjoyed this knife, to be honest. It's about $117, so I think it's a fair price for what you're getting. Solid, really genuine carbon fiber scales, M390 steel, a really nice design, made in Italy, and just a good knife. Now I wanted to give you some quick comparison pictures here. So this is it with a Grayish Cutlery number 15 TC Barlow. A knife that I really love, my first GEC knife, and a similar knife. Now this knife is actually more similar in size to the GEC number 77 pattern, which historically so far, the Barlows on that pattern have been exclusive to Collector Knives. I don't have one, unfortunately, but just be aware that it is closer to that size. And then here is a case Barlow. And then we have a case Trapper, full-size Trapper. And I also wanted to show with this knife, my only other similar knife, in that it is a shadow pattern. And what that means is that there's no bolsters. So again, this knife has no bolsters, has no liners. That's what you typically would call a shadow pattern. And this is a Jeffrey Mitchell custom that I got a while back that is also a shadow pattern. Now, speaking of it, I think sometimes people think of them as a little bit less sturdy. I have never had an issue. I think especially being that this knife is screw construction, you really don't have to worry about that. You're not gonna be using a slip joint knife for, you know, something strenuous enough that it's gonna break these carbon fiber handles. So I do enjoy that it is a shadow pattern, and I have a couple other. This is really my only other modern slip joint, traditional styled modern slip joint, and then it has screw construction. This is a Rough Rider, not really in the same, anywhere near the same quality or, of course, price. And then this is a Spyderco Rhodey. So probably a lot of people who come from modern knives are more familiar with it. It's much smaller, but it has that feature. Well, I don't know if you'd call it a feature, but it has those flat screws on the show side. And so you can see what I mean by that if this knife had the flat screws or flat sides of the screw or heads of the screw on the show side. Now the Rhodey actually is pinned at the butt of the knife, but you can see how it would look a little bit different on the Slim Dom if it had the flat heads of the screws on the show side. So again, I have just honestly really enjoyed this knife. I have carried it since I got it. I'm going on a trip where I can't take a whole lot of knives, but I'm probably going to be taking this with me even still. And I've just really enjoyed it. I probably will get more of them too. I think that I will get the round head and or the shuffler in the slim version. Probably the titanium, but they do also have some cool copper ones and micarta ones. So yeah, I have really enjoyed this knife. It's just one, like I said, sometimes a knife really hits you the right way, and that's the case for this LionSteel CollectorKnives exclusive Slim Dom in diamond carbon fiber. Again, a little bit of a long name, but if you enjoyed this video, make sure you give it the thumbs up. You can also subscribe to my channel and click the bell so you know when I post new videos. I've got lots more coming, as always. And also check out my social media. I'm on Instagram and Facebook at Knife Thoughts, and my website, knifethoughts.com, where I have articles on knives like this and knife-related tools. And like I said, I'll post a link to the article on the Warhorse. And as always, don't forget to go out and do good.